everybody, and welcome back to AP Hug. Just a couple things before we get started with Key Issue 3. I hope you guys were able to catch up in any of your classes last week with the reset. That being said, this week we are going to have a little bit of an easy week. I'm going to only post 2 videos and an assignment. So it should be an easy week. So if you're still behind, you can get caught up really quickly. And then next week we'll jump right back into our 5 assignments every week. But this week, I wanted to give you another little extension to get your feet underneath you and not have to take off running. So this week, we'll have 2 videos for discussion and then 1 assignment. So by the end of this week, your notes for Chapter 1 should be completely done. And just a heads up, next week, we will have 2 assignments, and then we will take a test for Chapter 1. So please make sure that if you have questions, you let me know sooner rather than later. Today we're going to talk about Key Issue 3. You should have your notes done for that one already. Key Issue 3, little short one, a couple key things that we got to talk about. We're going to talk about scale, space, and connections. Okay, first off, scale, thinking about global and local. Those are our 2 different contracts. There are multiple scales in between those things, but those are our 2 spectrums. So our large side of the scale is going to be globalization, where an idea has spread throughout the entire world and is existent almost everywhere. And then we have down to our smallest scale, which would be local diversity. Okay, very centralized location and identifying a smaller area. Okay, with globalization, thinking about things on the world scale, it doesn't necessarily have to be used or practiced everywhere in the world to be globalized, but it needs to be available everywhere. Okay, so a great example of globalization is going to be McDonald's. Okay, it is pretty much everywhere in the entire world. It is fully globalized. It is on 6 of the major continents. Looking at this map, you see we have quite a few countries that have thousands of restaurants, and all the way down to below 10, but they are on every single continent. Okay, McDonald's is a great example of economic globalization and cultural globalization, because no matter where you go in this picture, if you see those golden arches, even if you don't know what language this is right here, you know what that symbol means. So you know exactly what you're getting. So it's a part of the culture. Okay. Space. Okay, there are a couple different things that we need to talk about with space: density, concentration, and patterns. Okay, so density and concentration, typically those get confused. They're kind of similar, but they're different. So density is just the number of things in an area. So, like thinking of a classroom, there are 30 kids in a classroom. That would be a density, 30 kids per classroom. That's a good density ratio. Concentration is going to be how those 30 kids in a classroom are laid out. Okay, are they equally distributed throughout the entire classroom? Are there more on the right side than the left side? Are they all clustered in the front? That's going to be concentration. Are they all clustered together, or are they going to be dispersed throughout the entire classroom? Okay, and then pattern, we work on grid, linear, or web. Okay, I'll show you examples of those when we get to it. Okay, so in your notes, I believe I made you draw the 2 different types of concentration with 10 dots. 10 dots would be closely together like this, and then dispersed would be more further apart like that. Having a lower density will typically coincide with a dispersed concentration, and then having a higher density typically goes along with a clustered concentration. Okay, so here are some different examples of how those 2 things interact. Okay, up here we have a low density and a dispersed concentration because there are fewer houses. But then B and C, we have the same amount of houses, but their concentration is very different. Okay, I would say this is more dispersed. They're evenly distributed throughout the entire area. This one we have smaller clusters. Okay, we have a cluster here, cluster over here, and then we have an open area. Okay, so how density and concentration coincide with each other, they're fairly similar but very different. Okay, with talking about concentration and distribution, or density, it's also going to show us a lot about a culture as well. If you look at cities and how different ethnic groups are distributed throughout the city, it's going to show you a lot about their cultural identity. Looking at Los Angeles here with our different ethnicities, African American, Asian American, Hispanic, Latina, or Latino, or white, okay, they're going to tell us distinct characteristics of each of these places. Okay. Same thing, different example with distribution of LGBT people. Okay, typically you'll find more LGBT communities on the coasts of our country rather than the middle of our country, and that's due to different cultural values held, especially here in the South and the Midwest, are very different from those cultural values held on our two coasts. This is another one of comparing income from women to men, the cultural distribution of that across the entire world. Okay, so looking at different scales, local, um, based on country, or not quite. So local, country, and then global are our three different scales right here. Okay, I thought I had a pattern one. I guess I didn't. Sorry. Talking about space inequality and equality. In the world, we're going to have developing countries and less developed countries. Throughout time, those two have fluctuated. In the time period we live in, there are more developed countries than undeveloped countries, but there is still a lot of inequality between the two. If you look at this graph up here, we have developed or developing countries, which are going to be our lower end countries, with their PPPG, how much money they make compared to developed countries. That's still a huge inequality gap in between those. Okay, so depending on where you are in the world will also kind of depend on what development you're experiencing. In Europe and North America, we're typically developed countries. We're at the higher end of the scale. But if you go to continents like Africa and some parts of Asia, you're going to be on the lower scale of development. Okay, so space inequality plays a huge factor. Talking about the United States on its own, with national incomes, we see a lot more people impoverished in the South than we do in other places. So here on the West Coast, our southern border, and then over here on the east in the South, they're going to be below 5% of the national average income. Okay, so they're going to have a lot more impoverished people, or this is going to be more children born in those lower income families, which is going to cause a huge inequality gap between the South and the North, or the South and the West. Okay, connections. There are two types of diffusion, but there are four things you need to remember. There's relocation diffusion, where it's basically somebody taking an idea from the first place they lived and taking it to the next place they live. Okay, so a great example of relocation diffusion is going to be the United States. Okay, people moving from Europe to what we know now as the United States, they're going to bring those ideas with them and stay here in the U.S. and create a new country eventually. Okay, that's an example of relocation diffusion. The other type is going to be expansion diffusion, where things are going to grow or start in one spot and then spread out from there. Okay, there are three different types of expansion diffusion. We have hierarchical, contagious, and stimulus. Okay, in your notes you had these these things in a box, so hopefully you have it filled out. Hierarchical, this follows some sort of chain of command. It can either start at the bottom or the top, but it goes through a chain of command. An example of this could be here at school. Okay, if there is a new idea started by the students, it would go up the chain of command to the principal. Or if our principal has a new idea, it could go down the chain of command from there as well. Okay, so that's hierarchical diffusion. Contagious diffusion, this is the easiest way to remember this is to think about different diseases that if you start coughing and sneezing, the next person to probably get sick is the person sitting right next to you. Okay, so that's going to be a contagious diffusion. If I start a new idea, it's probably going to go to the people that surround me the most or the people that are closest to me, and then it's going to continue to spread and get bigger from there. Okay, stimulus diffusion. Okay, this is a different one to think about. This is going to be an idea that is started from a failure. Okay, so it has a stimulus. An example in your book, or you should have read about, would be with cell phones. Okay, if you guys remember back when, let's say Apple, they changed their phones to where they no longer had a headphone jack, and then the headphones plugged into your charging port. That was actually a failure. A lot of people still don't like that idea and are mad about that idea. So all the other phone companies have decided not to do that idea and stick with having a second audio jack in their phones rather than messing up like Apple did and having a dip in sales. Okay, so that diffused through a failure from one company. Okay. Relocation diffusion, here are some just examples of these things. So taking one idea and taking it to another place and expanding from there. Another thing with connections, a big thing is going to be the flow of information in between them. Okay, ideas are going to grow from people around you. Okay, so if you don't have a connection with somebody on the other side of the world, it's going to take a long time for that idea to get to them. So in today's age, we have a lot more opportunity with this because we have the technology that we can communicate around the world fairly easily. But this is still going to take some work. That if you want your idea to spread throughout the entire world, you have to create those connections across the world. Okay. Another thing is space-time compression. This is a key vocab term you want to use. This is how, throughout history, the time it takes to travel to a new destination, how that has gotten faster and faster and faster as technology and has the world progressed. So, starting back in 1492, traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, that took about 37 days. Okay, that we weren't very technologically advanced then, but we flash forward and we go throughout history. 1927, you could fly across the Atlantic Ocean in 34 hours. So we went from 37 days to 34 hours. That is a huge difference with our time-space compression. And then here, with even more technological advances in 1962, this rocket could orbit the world 3 times in only 5 hours. Okay? So as time has gone on, the space we are able to travel has grown tremendously. Okay? That's basically key issue 3. Please make sure you go back to Canvas and answer these 2 questions. Again, if you guys have questions at all, please feel free to email me. I think you're all doing a great job up to this point. There's only a few of you that I need to talk to. So keep it going, guys. If you have questions, get a hold of me. If you think I can be doing something better, please let me know. I am very open to feedback. So please email me whatever you want to tell me. Thank you, guys.